Now, and despite what one may think, I'm really not so much at odds against a lot of theories concerning these weeks of Daniel, only the positioning of some of its information. For instance, I agree with the timetable of 1 week, 7 days, as to equaling prophetically to 7 years, as I've already made known. Therefore, the prior 69 weeks will equal to 483 years. That is, if we can find somewhat of a starting point of 483 years earlier than when the 69th week is supposed to end. Usually, as some say, at the baptism of Jesus by John or etc. Then we can see when to begin, as others say, with the decree given to Ezra by, oh great day, I'm not going to pronounce this, Artaxerxes the First, in about 458 to 457 BC, or etc. Now these theories are given at Wikipedia in the form of some common Christian beliefs. So let's turn there to Wikipedia right quick for prophecy of the 70 weeks. There is a long-standing tradition within Christianity of reading Daniel chapter 9 as a messianic prophecy fulfilled in Jesus Christ. The various Christological readings that have been proposed share a number of features in common. Either the anointed prince in verse 25a or the anointed one in verse 26a, or both, are understood to be references to Christ, who is also sometimes thought to be the most holy, that is anointed in verse 24, so the Peshitta and the Vulgate say. Some of the early church fathers also saw another reference to Christ in the prince who is to come, verse 26b. But this figure is more often identified with either the Antichrist or one of the Roman officials that oversaw the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, such as either Titus or Vespasian. The 7 and the 72 weeks are most frequently understood for the purpose of Christological interpretation as consecutive, making up a period of 69 weeks, or 483 years, beginning with the decree given to Ezra by Artaxerxes I in 458 or 457 BC, the terminus et quo, and terminating with the baptism of Jesus. The reference to an anointed one being cut off in verse 26a is identified with the crucifixion of Jesus, has been traditionally been thought to mark the midpoint to the 70th week. Now, let me say something real quick right here, because in this quote, it said that some people identify the prince that is to come with either Titus or Vespasian. I know a minute ago I had mentioned Caesar Nero as being the prince who sent the Roman army. Historically, that is accurate. Nero sent the army to besiege, but he died right near the beginning of that, and his general that was over the besieging of Jerusalem was Vespasian. And so they sent him back to Rome at that time and made him emperor. And so the besieging was still going on during his time of ruling, and he set his son Titus to finish the besieging. So you're going to find all three names involved historically with the besieging of Jerusalem. So I say Caesar Nero because he's the prince who initially sent the Roman army to the besieging of Jerusalem. And I'm going to say one more thing. In my book, Satan, the Devil, and Hell, which I'm also reading, making videos of, I get into a good amount of detail about the historical background that I'm just briefly covering here. But that's going to be later on in the reading of that book and not right away. So please stay tuned for that as well. Now, certainly there are variations of all such beliefs, though most of them end the 69th week with Jesus' earthen ministry, either at the beginning of it, as so says Wikipedia that we just read, or even with his death at the cross, etc., somewhere around there. But for this present book and for this present study, that part doesn't currently concern us, of what precisely had either happened at the beginning or the ending of those 69 weeks. Though I do believe that they are all somewhat accurate to Daniel's prophecy, as in being within the confines of the proper time, somewhere around there. And also I had already given my own take on those weeks at the beginning of this current explanatory note. For herein, what I'm really trying to do is to paint a stark picture of the 70th week, of when that last 7 years took place. A time of which, as most scholars also believe, that are separated by a certain space of time, that is, the end of the 69th week and the beginning of the 70th week, has a separation of time. But as to that space of time, most give a ghastly expanse of about 2,000 years. This certainly is where I mostly differ. For, and as I've already said, in my own estimation, the 70th week fits best with some events of the 1st century AD, in the middle of which, indeed right in the middle of a 7-year war with Rome, the oblation, the sacrifice, actually stopped when Jerusalem's temple came crashing down in destruction, in turn making that space of silence to have only been 40 years out of a total sum of 490 years. That is, 70 weeks at 7 years per week in calculation. Therefore, that 40 years within those 490 years could almost seem like a mere half an hour of silence in God's timetable of events. However, and even so, we're still pretty early in this book, just hitting the 3rd chapter now, and there's still much talk about concerning the 1st century AD before this picture that I'm currently trying to form becomes a little more clear. So we're certainly not done with this topic yet.